Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of Outcomes. I'm your host, Barrett King, and with me today is a super special guest. His name is Vince. He is actually the founder of Ultimate Partnerships. Hopefully that sounds familiar to you all, and a host of his own show, The Ultimate Guide to Partnering. I'm excited because he's got some really interesting thoughts on marketplace and a bunch of background experience in hyperscaling. Just a fascinating guy, great human being. So my friend, welcome to the show.
Barrett, thank you so much for having me. I love what you're doing here. I've really been enjoying listening to Outcomes. So thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's fun to get to talk to brilliant folks like yourself. I think the thing for me that my core takeaway has been so far kind of centered around is this idea that, we're having dialogues around the things that are important to folks in ecosystem and marketplace, in partner development, in just anything that I care about. I get to talk to smart people about. So it's worked out well for me just personally. Before we kick off, we got a bunch to talk about today, obviously. First and foremost, I ask everyone the same question, which is specifically, what does partnerships mean to you? And you had said it's about going further together. Do you want to add to that? Do you want to change it? The floor is yours.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the old African proverb. And I always think about people are trying to understand why they should even have partnerships and have partnership strategies. So that clearly is significant for me. What I also think about is in terms of where vision and values align, right? So that alignment of those two things, so many partnerships are really just transaction or vendor to partner, and they're really not true partnerships. And so I think the difference, or one of the differentiations, and I talk about a set of operating principles around what makes successful partnering, and one of them is actually around vision.
It's interesting. So you kind of opened the door for me. What are the other concepts and values that you bring into that conversation? Because you said obviously one of them is this idea of vision and kind of collective value set. What else is in that playbook?
We could talk about the principles probably the rest of the podcast, but one of the first ones, and this is where a lot of organizations get tripped up. I call it mindset, whether it be a partner-led mindset, a forward-thinking mindset, a scarcity versus opportunity mindset, and so on. But mindset is critical to success. A lot of people are having conversations right now about why partnering isn't necessarily at the C-suite level. A lot of that has to do with mindset of the leadership team, right? And how they're coming together. Executive commitments, a second principle, key and important, right? What is the CFO's commitment? What is the organizational commitment from the C-suite on down through the organization? Is everyone saying the same thing up and down the organization around partnering? This vision and value proposition, getting that right within, do our values align? Are we operating from the same set of principles? And are we trying to drive the same set of outcomes? And then maniacal focus, we could do this kumbaya thing and say we're going to do a lot of great things together, but are we applying the focus? Have we set OKRs? Do we have a rhythm around the business? Are we applying a RACI on both sides of both organizations moving forward? There's also branding and marketing and a few other things we can go through and spend the rest of the day here, but those are the operating principles, and it's sort of how I foundationally built my business. And all of my years of experience in sales and leadership roles, coming into the partner world, how I think about partnerships.
Well, it's interesting because you're talking about concepts that I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but they come up often, right? And the framework that you're describing to me feels, perhaps because I've talked about it enough at this point, like the things you should logically do. But I have to imagine you found throughout your career, I can think of cases now in my own career, that so many components of that equation are missing or are in sort of half order and not to their completion, where you could actually go and execute on the full start to finish of that exercise. How much of that process you're describing, the principles you're articulating here, requires, if you will, the full scope? Versus if I'm listening to this, right? If I'm a guest right now and if I'm a listener right now and I'm listening to you, how much of what you just shared do I have to have in its entirety, or how much could I then take a piece of and action on and try and build towards the bigger picture?
I think any one of them could be actionable, right? So as you think about it, the last one being agility, that's come up quite a bit in some conversations recently. And a lot of this grew out of the fact that I was in a role at Microsoft leading a $4.6 billion ecosystem across ISVs, SIs, transactional partners, influence partners, and the like. And then I went to the other side and I saw it from the other side, right? And I saw what worked and what didn't work. And so, yes, we all would agree, these things seem like foundational, every organization should do them up and down every department of the organization, right? But they don't. Or they think they do. And unless you observe or you analyze what's working, what's not working, you won't be able to say, like, this is what's working, what's not working. And these are the areas you need to get better alignment, greater focus, and fix, I guess, ultimately to achieve the outcomes you want to achieve across the business.
Yeah, the idea of being a student of the data, being a student of the sort of general process itself comes up quite a bit.
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of folks recently that'll say things like, how do you know if it's working? Or my favorite question is like, how do I know I should start a partner program? In every one of those questions, it's the same, for me at least, process, which is first and foremost, look at what you have and deep dive analysis, do an analysis rather on what you're actually executing for the customer, type of work you're doing, what value you're delivering, what is their benefit by working with you? And then look for the supporting services around that. And everyone always says the next question, how do I identify those? And I would say, well, let's talk about what your customers are asking you for that you're not delivering on. And they say, well, how do I do that? It's like, well, go ask them and document it, right? And look at that holistically across your entire customer base, whether that's 10 people or 10,000 people, and start to look for those opportunities to fill the gaps. You do that because you study the actual process of what your customers are doing as they interact with your brand and then where their gaps are. That's a great call out.
And also when you look at it from both sides of the table, right? The other party, the partner on the other side of the table, some of those things are glaring gaps or weaknesses. And if you just ask, they'll tell you, like, you need to go fix this one thing. This is why you're not successful working with us. And so I ask every single one of my guests, like, what makes successful partnerships? And when the partnerships fail, what was the kryptonite? And ultimately it comes down to those type of things. So that's where the body of work came from. I'm up to 175 interviews, maybe a little bit more than that now, but that's the body of work of interviews and sort of my laboratory in terms of how I look at partnerships.
It's interesting. And so in that framework, then, are you, like, when you're having these conversations, are you finding that those are your common themes that stand out the most? And that's how you were able to build this process? It's just fascinating to me to think about, to your point, you've taken something that may to some feel more, I don't know, direct or obvious, and yet it's such a vital way, a pathway, if you will, of developing a successful programmatic approach to building something.
I wish I could say it was that scientific. What happened was after the almost 10 years at Microsoft, and then doing consulting work and starting the podcast, but then going back inside a $1 billion ISV, largest software company in their sector, and then deciding after 2 years of engagement, I knew what wasn't working. I came out and wrote a manifesto, and that manifesto consisted of these 7 principles.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And a lot of it has to do with alignment from a hyperscaler to a partner perspective, right? My background has been around working with the hyperscalers. We talked about marketplaces being so fundamental right now. But yeah, I think that it really kind of grew out of that. Like, these are the things that weren't working, or these are the things that are working. And clearly there are things that across my whole career I've seen as sort of universal principles. And I'm also a big fan of Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective, one of the best business books I have found over the years, and got to see him speak when he was alive. But so I always thought about that principle-based approach as opposed to tactical-based, because we could all apply tactics, and tactics are situational, and principles are universal.
They are. And then, you made the comment, obviously, in context there around how vital marketplaces are right now, how the opportunity lies in doing something very impactful there. I know it's an important topic for you. So let's talk about let's define it first. What does a marketplace mean to you, so the guest or the audience rather, can listen to that and understand it?
Well, I'll first start with the quote from Canales. Our good friend Jay McBain has been out there in our world. I like to refer to him sometimes as the Pied Piper of the. He
kind of is, though, right?
Movement.
Yeah, we can joke, but he kind of is leading us all down the path. So that's a good call out.
But what's come to the forefront recently from Canales is the $45 billion opportunity by the end of 2025, right? That will go through marketplaces. And, fundamentally, marketplaces were not nearly as significant just even a couple of years ago. And if you thought about co-selling and partnering, it's 2 organizations coming together and trying to figure out what that is, that dance looks like. The marketplace opportunity creates this, I'll call it an NFT, or non-fungible token, which says we have created something here, whether that is a SaaS application, whether it's SaaS plus services, whether it's whatever that is. And this non-fungible token is now something we can go sell together. We can go co-sell together. That's item number one about marketplaces. Item number two is all of the hyperscalers have huge cloud commitments, right? They've gone to all of the big, think enterprise, midsize, and even small organizations and said, come build with us, come lift and shift with us. And so there's billions, there's hundreds, over $100 billion of durable budgets that are committed now to, if you just take Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, across those three organizations. And during this time of economic headwinds that we've been seeing, well, SaaS companies are struggling now and budgets and layoffs and the like, those budgets still exist. And how can I go effectively work with those organizations? And what you're also seeing, the dynamic within the four walls of the hyperscalers, is it takes away a lot of the friction from their own organizations. If you look at Microsoft, just laid off 10,000 people, and they're revamping what they're going to do in terms of their co-sell and their partnering model. I think they'll be coming out of their fiscal year at the end of June here, and I think you'll see some real emphasis here on marketplace because, again, it does take a lot of friction out. It makes it a lot easier for a seller. If you're one of the 50,000 sellers, feet on the street, to be able to really identify like who's the right partner to bring into that opportunity and go sell together. So digitization, enablement, all those things come to fruition through this marketplace concept.